My name is Marshall England. This is Ken Ballard. But we're FortifyData. We're here today to talk about implementing continuous threat exposure management, unifying risks, automate the action, and reduce exposure with confidence. So I will turn it over to Ken.
Terrific. Thanks, Marshall. And it's great to be here talking about one of my favorite topics. I've been in cybersecurity now for 25 years, and I'm still amazed at how certain basic concepts like vulnerability management still give CISOs, and security teams absolute fits. Uh, and it's really never, it's the challenge for cybersecurity is really centers on the one question: are we measurably safer for the investment we're making in cybersecurity? I don't think it's really about how many vulnerabilities get patched or how many alerts you processed. That's a common reporting metric. What really matters is the risk question. Is risk actually decreasing? I think how you answer that question depends entirely on your own conviction. What do you actually believe about your organization's security posture? Now, if you're like most security leaders, you're managing arguably thousands of vulnerabilities every year. You've got multiple detection platforms. You might have separate external and internal scanning tools, maybe some threat intelligence, and you're tracking patching backlogs that just continue to grow. And at the same time, your team and yourself, you're responsible for architecture, your security architecture, compliance and security audits, cloud transitions, identity governance, third-party risk management. The list just goes on and on. And the result is cognitive overload. We've been hearing that more and more, both for yourself and for your team. So let me give you a quick example. Let's say that one of your scanners flags a vulnerability that has a high CVSS score. Okay, so you have to figure out what that IP is. Is that you suspect that maybe it's not that important, and so you go and find what that IP is, and sure enough, it's a low impact asset. Then you go and you realize, gosh, there's threat intelligence that says this vulnerability has a known exploit, a KEV. And perhaps you happen to notice that there's an open port as well that shouldn't be there. All this takes time to gather and understand and make sense of all these signals. And yet you kind of have to do it. It's just that when it's ad hoc, it's really slow and it's highly prone to inconsistencies and the analyst, whoever's working on this, their current whim. Uh, and that lack of clarity is what CTEM is really designed to solve. So I love this slide. I find it disturbing, but I do like it. After more than a couple decades of real formal vulnerability management programs, the industry still continues to experience accelerating and higher vulnerabilities. You can see it's really never plateaued, maybe a little bit around 26, 27. But boy, lately, that volume is just growing exponentially. And it's pretty dramatic and scary. I believe Gartner came up with the term CTEM, continuous threat exposure management, in an attempt to change this perspective. And what they say when you read their descriptions is it's not about about the total vulnerabilities. That's not the key variable. It's the exposure. You can't patch everything. Attempting to remediate every high CVSS, every 8, 9, and 10 vulnerability, for most organizations, externally and internally, it's mathematically unsustainable. Um, Now, 20 years ago, the traditional vulnerability management process was simply getting the CVSS scores, patching when it's available, and then tracking your SLA timelines on how quick you patched. But had nothing to do with asset criticality, business context. What is on that asset? Is it data? What kind of data? Is in zero trust environments, is that even reachable? How is it reachable? And then, of course, your own compensating controls. And so, as another example, a high severity vulnerability on a non-critical marketing server with no sensitive data may pose less of a risk, of a business risk, than a medium vulnerability on a domain controller or some revenue generating application. And so when prioritization does not incorporate this business context, then remediation inherently becomes misaligned with risk. And over time, this misalignment contributes to inefficiency and your own fatigue and your staff's fatigue. Now, I can see pretty much everybody that's on this call, and I suspect based on your size and what I can see and guess at, most of you have pretty strong technical capabilities. You probably have enterprise grade vulnerability scanners for external and internal surfaces. You surely have EDR or XDR on your endpoints, threat intelligence, dark web, and hopefully some sort of ticketing system to track and issue out remediation. On paper, that kind of coverage is really good, but the challenge isn't the tools, it's the cohesiveness and how they integrate. Do these tools collectively provide a coherent and defensible exposure narrative for you? Or do they require significant interpretation to correlate their findings and then leave you to guessing how to remediate them? And the fact is that most tools are designed to be standalone. They have separate data models. They have independent scoring methodologies. They tag assets differently. And they certainly will use different prioritization logic. On their own, they're helpful and they look really good and they look good in a demo. But as a whole, they require a lot of time. And this fragmentation is the silent killer. Major breaches rarely result from a single vulnerability in isolation. They emerge from multiple misconfigurations, weak identity management and social engineering, phishing, and such, different privilege escalations, and perhaps internal assets that get exposed through some external vulnerability. Each of your tools likely helps you identify a piece of that chain, but few environments automatically correlate them. And again, I'm big on examples. Consider a vulnerability scanner reports some unpatched web service. Maybe with your external ASM that it's internet exposed. Threat intelligence flags it with some active exploit in the wild, and dark web shows lost credentials that could be used for social engineering. If those signals are not all unified, you can't see the attack path. CTEM categorically integrates all of these into a single context. So as mentioned, Gartner, they came up with the term CTEM, and what they're trying to do is define a new paradigm. CTEM is They define it as an they define it as an integrated iterative approach to prioritizing and refining security posture environments. Pull out the usual Gartner abstractions, and CTEM is an operating discipline focused on continuous exposure reduction aligned to business impact. It shifts the emphasis from reactive vulnerability processing to true strategic exposure management. And so CTEM isn't really a whole new class of tools. Instead, it orchestrates them into a repeatable, measurable framework that manages ongoing risk. So I like to compare, what it is and what it isn't, particularly with CTEM. CTEM is not, again, it's not a new scanning product. It's not a rebranding of, attack surface management. And it certainly isn't, some new compliance program. CTEM is always asset aware. It's threat informed, it's business aligned, and it's iterative. It's staying up to date automatically. And it asks which exposures meaningfully impact your organization's operational, financial, and perhaps regulatory risk profile. And then it builds a structure that we see here for prioritizing and incorporating a remediation process into it. So, and CTEM should follow several logical processes. First is scope or asset clarity, as we've said. You can't manage exposure on assets that you don't know exist. And that may include shadow IT, it may include legacy systems assumed that you've assumed are decommissioned and aren't. We see a lot of DNS record problems. Maybe a cloud asset falls outside of your normal governance or third-party integrations that you may not be aware of, and so on. And so beyond identification, CTEM requires really solid asset classification. So when you're thinking about asset classification, you're thinking about revenue generating assets, systems with regulated data, your identity infrastructure, and really any other kind of critical operational technology. Without that view and classification, all assets will inherently just end up being treated equally, which is strategically unsound. Discovery extends beyond vulnerability enumeration. And it includes that business context and mitigating controls. We have to consider the controls that you've put in place to mitigate vulnerabilities that perhaps you can't fix. For example, another good example, we see a lot of SSL, and you probably do too, a lot of SSL vulnerabilities. They are typically pretty high on the CVSS score. And they pop up all the time, depending on how many assets you have. But if exploitation requires a man-in-the-middle position and your architecture mitigates that in some way, it may not be an emergency. And so discovery considers that and puts that context. It informs the urgency of it. Contextualizing provides some sort or some level of this perspective. It does incorporate exploitability of the vulnerability, the business impact, what the data is, how sensitive it is, and compensating controls. Without context, security teams have to fall back to CVSS scores and old-fashioned activity metrics. But with context, teams can make real risk-based decisions. And that decision making starts with prioritization. Now, NIST says risk is the intersection of impact and likelihood, where likelihood considers threat intelligence, exploitability, mitigating controls about the vulnerability. Impact has to do with your business, operational and regulatory issues. This aligns with NIST and other formal risk methodologies that make your decisions better and more defensible. So I think that's an important distinction. Mobilizing means getting things fixed. And each prioritized exposure, you've got to have somebody that's assigned to that vulnerability and fixing it, some level of defined priority, a due date. And once it's supposedly done, you've got to be able to validate that it's done and done completely. And without the remediation or without the accountability, that kind of remediation ultimately fails. And so, yeah, and so we're another point I wanted to make is, we're not big fans of scores, although we provide one, and it's, we're fully transparent. But what they do allow you to do is look at all your entire overall exposure and what those trends look like. It's the trends that you want to watch. You should still be able to see SLAs and how you're progressing on fixing problems. But if exposure is not trending downward, there must be a problem, and it's pretty clear. So it needs to be up to date. That the C and CTEM is continuous, and obviously your threat landscape changes all the time. Your infrastructure evolves, business priorities change, and this loop must operate continuously and automatically and very efficiently. So we see, obviously, as purveyors of a CTEM solution, we see a lot of failures when clients come to us or prospects come to us, and they generally fall into one of these four categories. We see a lot of teams that, for various reasons, they revert back to CVSS only prioritization, and there's a variety of reasons for that. We see a lot of unclear remediation ownership between security and IT, with a lack of clarity on, what's important, when the expectations are, and such. When you start to orchestrate your different tools, we see some really complex setups and processes. And that can cause things to break, overload your teams, and cause them to, again, just revert back to CVSS only prioritization. And of course, light staff or short staffing, can create ongoing problems. CTEM, no matter what you do, you should have a focused and disciplined team as part of that, as part of your CTEM solution. So we can't talk about anything in cybersecurity without mentioning budget. The key here is, remember that CTEM does not inherently require significant new capital investment. Again, many of you probably already have plenty of discovery tools, vulnerability scanners, threat intelligence, ticketing systems, and so on. The challenge is bringing them all together. And this is done, we've seen it done with APIs. When it's not in a platform, we've seen it done with APIs, and increasingly with AI assisted correlation. It's a lot more feasible today than it was just in prior years. So, um, so a platform like FortifyData does simplify this process by putting everything in one spot, from asset discovery to business impact, considerations, multi-tool vulnerability detection, threat intelligence, risk prioritization, and tracking over time. All of this is in a unified screen or dashboard or narrative. So let's see, this screen uh, um, uh, talks about a risk model that is again consistent with NIST. And you can see this over here. You can see it lets you see each vulnerability and what it means to your organization. You can see that NIST concept of impact and likelihood. The likelihood in this screenshot is expanded. It shows active exploitation data, how mature the vulnerability is. Are there CVEs or KEVs? Any environmental exposures, and you can put in your mitigating controls. The result of this is a pretty dynamic exposure perspective on this vulnerability on this asset. And ultimately, that's where you need to be. When CTEM is working right, we see security teams, it removes a lot of the ambiguity and analyst uncertainty and inconsistencies. The debates on what's a priority and what's not. Those decisions get made once, and they're intricate, but then they're set, and so your analysts can confidently move forward rapidly with remediation, and knowing that remediation does align with the strategic risk that you're concerned about. And as you can see, a score and a trend line here, executive, conversations, they shift away from those volume discussions. How many vulnerabilities did we correct? Things like that, that arguably may not matter. What really does matter is that risk reduction. And so, your executives see you, and they may see you scratching your head, yawning because you're not getting enough sleep, looking worried. And instead, with CTEM, they will actually see your risk modeling and the outcome of it. Hopefully, they see measurable exposure reduction. This slide is actually not good because it shows your risks. Oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, it shows that your risk is getting better. We use a scoring methodology. Higher scores are better, and it overlays industry background. And so they will see this in reports that you're giving them, and so they'll know that their investments in you and in the security tools are actually working, which is great. And so CTEM should support all of this with a lot of transparency, continuous exposure reduction and management of material risk, faster and more defensible decision making by your team. So people can say, why did you do this and not that? They'll be able to answer that. And sometimes that can be pretty important. And then, aligning, the technical remediation with the business risk, which is where executives come back into the fray. They know that you're watching, that you have the tools that you need, your staff is operating as a team, and that risk is essentially being effectively managed. And so this is what CTEM is all about. And so with that, I'm going to open it up to any questions.
I did want to make another comment about operationally, right? Unify your data sources, understand the context, prioritize it against the business needs. There's also, so some of you might be doing that with point solutions. There's also a study that IBM and Palo Alto Networks did in terms of taking that approach to a platform where you leverage a platform. And they found a higher degree of ROI, I think like 110% ROI from leveraging a platform where everything is kind of unified versus the point solutions, which was like a 27% ROI because you got these different silos that all require different kind of specialization and then the manual process to normalize everything on the background. And then coinciding with that, they also found it took less time to discover true risks or potential incidents or potential sources of incidents compared to those with the point solutions. And this goes back to, I don't know if any of you read the original Gartner CTEM documentation back in late 2022, early 2023, but they had predicted at the time that organizations that adopted a continuous threat exposure management strategy and operationalized it were 3 times less likely to suffer from a cyber incident as a result of having the communication between different tool sets, aligning to the business risk, and having clear ownership of who would remediate and when it would get done to continue and then continually to iterate on that process. So I can throw that IBM study in here as well because I did think it was pretty good. IBM and Palo Alto Networks. I'll just put that in the chat as well. Thanks again for your time today. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.